Welcome to the Two-Handed Economist. I'm John Diamond from Rice University's Baker Institute. This show gives you what a one-handed economist can, both sides of the argument. We're not here to repeat sound bites. We're here to give you the full picture. Today is Wednesday, September 24th, and we're tackling a subject that stirs up a lot of debate, H-1B visas. But before we jump into that, I do want to mention the looming government shutdown. We discussed that issue on last week's episode, and everything there is still relevant. If you're interested in learning more about that and the broken U.S. budget process, feel free to jump back and listen to that. But for today, let's focus on H-1B visas. Are they a lifeline for U.S. innovation, or are they a way to undercut American workers? Who wins and who loses? And should we keep the program as is, or scrap it, or just reform it? All of these are interesting questions. On September 19th of 2025, President Trump signed a new proclamation titled Restriction on Entry of Certain Non-Immigrant Workers. This proclamation imposes a $100,000 fee on new H-1B visa petitions. What do we make of this new proclamation? Is it good or is it bad? Let's dig right in and find out. First, the basics. The H-1B visa is a temporary, non-immigrant visa that allows U.S. employers to hire foreign workers in specialty occupations. Think tech, engineering, medicine, finance, research, and others. It's initially valid for 3 years and extendable to 6 years. The annual cap on the number of visas is limited to 85,000 visas, 65,000 for those with at least a bachelor's degree, and there's an additional 20,000 more for workers with a U.S. master's or higher degree. Employers must show that they're paying the prevailing market wage for the occupation in the region that they hire the worker. But demand is so high that the government has to run a lottery system to decide who gets the visas and who gets in. So the rules are designed to balance labor demand and supply conditions for high-skilled occupations. Fairness, and at least on paper, the protection of U.S. workers are included. Let's talk about the upsides and the downsides, or at least the varying perceptions of the program. To start with, it's widely recognized that H-1B visas bring in highly skilled workers, especially in STEM fields. Companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, universities, and startups alike say they rely on this influx of talent. Economic studies suggest H-1B visa holders boost innovation, increase the number of patents filed, and start companies themselves. This suggests that this policy increases U.S. competitiveness in the global economy. For example, according to the American Immigration Council, in 2025, more than 46% of Fortune 500 companies, a total of 231 out of 500, were founded by immigrants or their children. The basic argument is that in certain industries, there's simply a shortage of qualified U.S. workers. H-1B visas help fill those gaps while creating economic benefits for firms, consumers, and complementary workers. But the program is not without controversy. Critics argue that some companies use H-1Bs visas to pay workers less than they would have to pay an American worker, or to replace the worker altogether. Even though prevailing wage rules exist, there are loopholes. The occasional news story of U.S. workers being asked to train their H-1B replacements are damaging to the story. That stings, and it fuels the narrative that H-1Bs are bad for domestic workers. In addition, some research suggests that there are negative impacts from H-1B visas. Kirk Doran in 2016, in a paper titled The Effects of High-Skilled Immigration Policy on Firms, finds that H-1B visas cause only a small increase in overall firm employment. But firms substitute away from other workers, especially less skilled natives. They also reduce earnings of native workers, and that firms' profits rise as firms capture the rents related to the increases in innovation. And he finds that there's relatively small increases in innovation on top of that. Other studies find alternative views, and there are several out there. The implication is that benefits accrue more to firms and shareholders than to the average U.S. worker. There are studies on both sides of these issues, so there's no single finding that we can rely upon. The demand for H-1Bs far exceeds supply, so it's basically the luck of the draw in terms of who gets them. Many talented individuals don't get through, and it's widely believed that some companies game the system by flooding it with applications, or at least they did before a change in the process in 2025. Recently, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which controls the allocation process for H-1B visas, changed from an employer-based to a beneficiary-based registration system, which should reduce the prevalence of multiple registrations for the same applicants by a single company. The current system likely favors larger firms with legal resources that can navigate or capitalize on the system more effectively. Smaller firms and startups may struggle and are at a distinct disadvantage. Finally, H-1B holders are tethered to their employer who sponsored them. If they lose their job, they only have 60 days to find a new one or leave the country. That creates leverage for employers, which increases the chance for employers to exploit this type of labor. The overall picture from economic studies implies that for firms, H-1Bs lower cost, expand capacity, boost profits, and drive innovation. For consumers, they benefit from more tech output, lower prices, and faster innovation. For workers, native high-skill workers may face wage pressure as they face more competition for their jobs. But there are spillovers in some contexts that raise wages and employments for native workers. Wage suppression concerns exist in certain industries more than others. This is especially true in industries such as accounting and consulting. In terms of the main policy takeaways, the effects vary by firm type, sector, and skill groups. And it's clear that caps and allocation rules also matter in terms of the overall effectiveness of the policy. On September 19, 2025, President Trump signed a proclamation titled Restriction on Entry of Certain Non-Immigrant Workers. Here are the key features of that proclamation. The proclamation imposes a new one-time $100,000 fee on any new H-1B visa petition submitted after 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on September 21st, 2025. The rule explicitly does not apply to previously issued H-1Bs or to renewals under the current rules. The proclamation states that it does not prevent any holder of a current H-1B visa from traveling in or out of the United States. It allows for potential exemptions as well. Individuals, companies, and industries may be excluded if the Secretary of Homeland Security deems the hiring is in the national interest and not harmful to U.S. security or welfare. The restriction is set to expire, unless extended, 12 months from the effective date. The proclamation also orders the Department of Labor to revise prevailing wage levels up and asks DHS to prioritize high-skill, high-wage petitions in future lotteries. The reactions to the new rule have varied widely. Immigration attorneys are raising red flags They argue the fee could unexpectedly be levied on change of employer positions or other filings, especially if filed after the effective date. How will the national interest exemptions be applied? That's the question. Tech firms, startup, and immigration advocates warn of a chilling effect on economic growth, increased cost burden, diminished talent inflow, and legal challenges will lead to slower growth and more uncertainty. Some legal scholars argue that Congress, not the executive branch, has the authority to set visa fees. The proclamation's sweeping nature may invite more courtroom battles. For each new H-1B petition, the sponsoring employer, who traditionally pays the application fees, would now face an additional $100,000 fee. This may dramatically shift the cost calculus of hiring foreign talent in the near term, and the longer term's effects will depend on if the policy is extended beyond next year. Some estimates have the total cost of around $14 billion over a decade. Because of this fee, employers may reserve H-1B petitions only for high-salary, senior-level roles that justify the cost, leaving out more junior or mid-level applicants. The barrier may be too high for smaller companies with tighter budgets, skewing the advantage toward tech giants and established firms. Analysts estimate the new fee could cut thousands of authorizations per month. One thing that we have to consider is the current state of the U.S. labor market. It's been exceedingly weak the last 4 months, and if the downtrend continues, that's really going to change how we think about and structure H-1B visas. Another important factor is AI, and how will it impact the U.S. labor market? Usually we're thinking of high-skill labor being complementary, but if high-skill labor is coming in to produce something that substitutes for U.S. labor, that's going to produce a challenging policy environment and one that's going to take a lot of thought in how we structure programs such as H-1B visas. So in closing, here's what to take away from this week. First, H-1B visas are both vital and controversial. They bring highly skilled workers who boost U.S. innovation and competitiveness, but critics argue they can suppress wages and displace some American workers. The true impact varies by industry, firm, size, and worker skill level. Second, policy design matters as much as the policy itself. Caps, lotteries, wage rules, and enforcement shape who benefits most. Larger firms with resources often navigate the system better, while smaller firms and workers remain at a disadvantage. Third, the new $100,000 fee marks a potentially dramatic shift. President Trump's proclamation could limit access to H-1B visas, especially for startups, while favoring large firms that are able to absorb the cost. It's expected to spark legal challenges and could reshape the visa landscape if extended. However, it's unlikely to reduce the number of H-1B workers, but it will increase the cost on firms that use these workers. That's it for this week's episode of The Two-Handed Economist. Thanks for tuning in. The Two-Handed Economist is a production of the Baker Institute for Public Policy, recorded on the campus of Rice University in Houston, Texas. Production support was provided by Shannon Moriarty, Kevin Young, and Karina Zimmel. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. It helps other listeners find this show. Until next time.